Welcome back, Wanderers, to another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today we're going to be diving into the subtle magic of quest design, where player agency meets environmental storytelling, with the talented Ian Lynch. Ian is a narrative and quest designer whose work spans RPGs, adventure games, and interactive stories that reward exploration and personal choice. Whether it's building branching quests or telling a story without a single line of dialogue, Ian's craft focuses on how to let players feel like the story is theirs. In this episode, we'll unpack how narrative can emerge from design itself, and how silence can sometimes speak louder than a line of dialogue. So let's get into it. Ian, thank you for joining me.
Hi, glad to be here.
I am excited to have you here today. I really want to talk to you about, because of your experience as quest designer and gameplay designer and your work in games in general. Specifically today, though, I would love to talk to you about player agency, environmental storytelling, and telling stories using environmental story. Like, how do you tell a story even without dialogue, without putting it right in front of the person's face, in front of the player's face? But before we get into that core topic, I like to find out a little more about you, your origin story, as we call it. How did you fall in love with gaming? How did you get into the industry? Your career path? How did you go from writer to designer, or back and forth? Take us through it.
Sure. I mean, I think my earliest real memory is when my older brother got a Super Nintendo for Christmas in 1994, I believe it was. And we got Super Mario World and the Super Mario All-Stars pack, which was, the beginning of my life of being relegated to Luigi Player 2, because he was older than me, so he got to be Mario. And I was just kind of blown away immediately. In terms of when I started to get into the storytelling in video games, the first game that really had an impact on me was Knights of the Old Republic, the Star Wars game back in, 2004, 2003. And it was the first time I kind of realized, oh, this is a story that wouldn't really work in any other medium. It wouldn't really work as a film or a TV show or a book. And that just blew my mind at the time. And it was also kind of concurrently at the same time, that's when I kind of really started to decide I wanted to be a writer professionally. But at the time, the thought of being a game writer didn't really cross my mind. I didn't know there was such thing, and especially because the term narrative designer as well didn't exist 20 years ago. So I initially kind of started studying screenwriting instead, thinking maybe I'll go down the film route or the television route. So I did that for a while with like a little bit of success here and there. But then around 2017, if I'm getting my dates correct, the summer of 2017, I played Breath of the Wild, Undertale, and Persona 5 back to back to back. My friends didn't see me for like 2 months. And I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to write for games, because to play three such fantastic games, all with really interesting and diverse stories, just completely hooked me. And at the start of 2018, I finally jumped into the games industry. Started off working on a small visual novel for a Dutch company, moved into mobile games where I was working on Star Trek Fleet Command for a few years, and then I made the jump to Poland where I was working for CD Projekt Red for a year, and then a few other little small freelance gigs here and there, and and that's brought me to today, where most recently I've kind of started working on my own stuff more.
Nice. I like to ask specifically narrative designers and game writers, did you play board games, tabletop role-playing games, physical games growing up, and did that impact your journey?
What's interesting is, I played board games, but it was very the traditional classic board games, a bit of Scrabble, a bit of Snakes and Ladders, stuff like that. D&D and more tabletop stuff, story-driven tabletop stuff, wasn't really a thing in Ireland, especially in the countryside where I grew up. I knew that D&D existed, for example, but stuff like, Cyberpunk or Vampires, Bloodlines and stuff like that didn't cross my path until I actually started getting into video games more as I grew up. So I didn't even take part in my first D&D campaign until like 2020, when it was the pandemic, and everyone was doing like campaigns over Zoom and stuff. And I immediately fell in love with it for sure. But yeah, it took a while for me to get there.
Yeah, that's cool. I sometimes it is part of the journey, and sometimes it's not. I'm always curious.
Hmm.
All right, well let's dive into the topic today. So, quest design. Let's start there. Quest design is about choice, obviously, and not just quite often not just binary choices, but like multiple choices and branching choices. And how do you personally think about the designing of quests or the creation of those pieces of a game that make the player's choices still matter?
I mean, the thing is, when you design a quest that has a choice, you're not you're not thinking too much about the choice as it happens. You're looking 2 hours down the line when you want there to be actual consequences. And it's kind of a running joke, both inside and outside the industry, of choices not really having proper consequences when you make them in games. Like, I love the Telltale games, but they always kind of
Right.
shoehorn you into a specific path, regardless of the choices you take. Um, so for me, as the idea of branching narratives has become more evolved and more sophisticated, it becomes so much more about the consequences and the payoff to the build. So I'm always thinking of several hours down the road, down the story, what are branches that will make sense narratively and thematically. And I almost kind of reverse engineer the choice a little bit from that, where I work backwards compared to where I might want a player to go if they choose the blue path or the red path, for example. So for me, it's almost like writing a mystery novel where you figure at the end and you work backwards a little bit.
That makes sense. You say consequence a lot. Like
Mm.
that really is the key, isn't it? It is making sure. Can you think of an example of a game that you've played or that you've worked on where that really, really hit home, like a consequence to a choice? You mentioned Knights of the Old Republic. Obviously, that's a good example of consequences based on choices. Can you think of another really good one just to have a...
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Undertale fan. It's been super influential on my narrative design career. And what I love about Undertale is that sometimes you don't even know the choices you're making until it's a bit too late. Like the first boss battle against Toriel, it's very difficult to spare her. I think it's like 99% of people accidentally kill her and not mean to, and they feel really, really guilty about it. So they'll close the game and reload their last save. And the game confronts you with that. It's like the game says, I know what you did. You can't go back. You have to deal with this. And the first time I played that, it absolutely blew my mind. So the, I think where games are going is certainly in terms of being a little bit more subtle with how it uses choice and consequence rather than just being blue pill, red pill kind of situation.
Right on. That there's so many questions that come out of that I could spin off, but let's stay on topic here.
Mhm.
So you've worked on games where environment is used to tell story with minimal dialogue, like I mentioned before. And this is something that I'm really trying to rack my brain around lately is how do you convey the nuances of a complex story or subtle tones that are not always obvious that often require various levels or character arcs that are tangled and twisted? How do you do things like that without dialogue using environmental design or environmental storytelling or other elements? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. For me, when I've been in that situation in my career, that's when I really learned how to collaborate with other disciplines because the way an artist thinks about storytelling or a sound designer or even like a lighting person, they will think about it in a completely different way than a writer or a narrative designer. And they'll come up with ideas that you never thought of because you can be a little bit too close to the story, if that makes sense, as a writer, that you can miss the broader picture, both literally and figuratively. So it's always good to kind of sometimes leave your ego as a writer at the door a little bit and talk to the other disciplines and figure out how they see things and how they might solve a problem that you end up encountering. And especially when I was working on Cyberpunk, there's so many moving parts from so many different disciplines and so many different teams. It was such an eye-opening experience to see through things through multiple different lenses.
Wow. Collaboration between interdisciplinary teams, it comes up all the time. I mean, that's a hallmark of the video game development industry. And leaving your ego at a door is a great example. I'm curious, did you learn other tools or techniques at CD Projekt Red or other places that allowed you to communicate with those other teams as a narrative person to pull story out of them in a way that didn't cause friction? Because you hear all kinds of stories about narrative people and other departments bashing heads.
Yeah.
What did you learn?
For me, I think the most important thing is like having a shared vocabulary, because if you just start a conversation with an artist coming at it from a very specifically writer point of view, you'll both end up using words and terms that maybe the other person won't fully. If you say something like, so we'll break into two, as in, breaking into act two or whatever, and an artist might be like, wait, what does that mean? What are we breaking? What?
Right.
And so it's so important to like always make sure you're on the same page in terms of the verbiage you're using. And that just makes things so much smoother. And also like every bit of like feedback or constructive criticism should be a conversation. It shouldn't be like, I don't like this, cut it, because that doesn't really help anyone. It should be, if this thing isn't working, how do we make it work? Is there something we can salvage out of this? What about it isn't working that we can maybe change or improve upon? So if you approach those kind of clashes, like you said, from a perspective of, if it's not working, how do we make it work? Instead of, it's not working, get rid of it. You learn so much more that way.
Yeah, that's smart. That's good. Let's go back to environmental storytelling for a second. I love environmental storytelling and environmental design. It's a one of those things I love. I got no words today, apparently. Good thing I'm talking on a podcast.
About writing.
Yeah, exactly. But environmental storytelling, it has its own language. It's its own beast. To help me out here, what are some of your favorite examples of really good environmental storytelling, whether you've worked on them, something you've done, or something you played, again, somewhere where the narrative heavy lifting is done by environment? That's so cool.
I mean, something that, like, not to brag, but there was one thing I was super proud of when I was working on a game called Bellwright. And Bellwright is this kind of medieval survival open world game. And what we did, it went into early access. And with the first early access release, we had this huge tree on a hill, right in the middle of the map. No one could miss it. And it had no leaves, no foliage, but there was like bodies hanging from it. It was very dark, very, very creepy. The thing is, with that first release, we didn't write any lore for why it was there. We didn't write or design any quests for why it was there. We just put it there and let people find it. And then when the next content release came out a few months later, that's when we wrote and designed a quest for it to explain what it was and why it was there. So that was just such a fun 3 months to just let the players find it, react to it, get a little bit freaked out by it, because it is pretty distinct imagery, I would say. So I think when it comes to like build up and payoff, you can do so much with environmental storytelling. These little details, these visual details, where someone will notice it, and even though they may not ask in the moment, what is it? But they'll kind of lodge it in their brain somewhere. Like, that was an interesting detail. I wonder what's up with that. And then, whether it's a few hours, or in the case of the early access game, a few months later, you can like spring it on them. Like, this is what we were planning the entire time. That's one of the most rewarding things for us as developers and designers, but hopefully for the players as well.
Oh, 100%. So what would you say is the lesson there for narrative writers, for narrative designers or game writers? What's the takeaway there?
Patience. As writers, when you have a million ideas and you just want to throw everything into the game, especially when people are really excited about their ideas and really proud of their ideas, they want to throw it all at the gamer early and quick and soon and rapid fire to the point where it can be overwhelming. But if you can just like take a breath, hold off, save your ideas for much later, knowing that, there's a good chance a significant portion of the audience might not even see it, but the payoff will be that much sweeter if you can just pace yourself and make sure you really let the build up and the ideas marinate a little bit. And then at the last possible moment when the player has either completely forgotten about it or is just like obsessed with finding it out what it is, that's when you answer it. The question that's been bugging them since the start. That's the kind of stuff I really love.
Brilliant. You know, work something like that into a game sometime in the future? Do that again?
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm always thinking as many steps down the road as possible.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, well let's circle back to the other side of this conversation. Player intent and quests, designing quests that feel. I guess the issue that I'm in the back of my head when I was thinking about this is lots of people play a game and they play the same content. They play the same quest, for instance. What can you do when you're designing a quest, when you're building a quest, when you're writing for a quest that makes, at least as much as possible, makes it feel personal for each player?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what I said earlier in terms of the variables and the little choices the player makes. It's easier if you make them a little more subtle rather than just being like, take the left path or the right path, because then statistically you're just splitting the audience 50-50 and 50% of the audience will have the same experience and the other 50% of the audience will have the same experience. So my approach is, rather than throwing one big decision at the player every so often, I try to make it so there's lots of little things, which sometimes can be a bit more complex to design. Sometimes it can be a little easier to design. But something as simple as maybe you spoke to an NPC in the first village and you were mean to them, and it'll come up maybe later when you need help, and that NPC decides, no, we're not going to help you. It's not a super obvious choice that you're just throwing in the face of the player and demanding they choose something right then and there. It makes the player legitimately think about everything they do moment to moment, rather than, like I said, just introducing these big, huge choices, these big crossroads every 5 to 10 hours. So for me, that's the best way to kind of personalize things a little bit for the player. Not with 3 or 4 massive choices, but with lots of little choices that they don't even realize they're making sometimes, that kind of have their payoffs in different ways down the road.
Interesting. To come at it from the other angle, is it possible to have too many choices, too many branches? Like, not just from scope and budget and project and timelines, but from like player hesitation and overwhelm?
Yeah. And the spreadsheet that I have for my game will tell you, yes, sometimes it can get a bit out of control. But I guess that's just kind of where self-editing comes in. Writing is rewriting, and the same applies for design and narrative design. For all the hundreds of great ideas you might have, sometimes there comes a point where you have to just cut out half of them, not only to stop the player getting overwhelmed or stop them overthinking, but just to make it easier on yourself to keep track of, especially when it comes to if you're programming yourself or someone else is programming for you, and you don't want to overwhelm your team or yourself either. So
Right.
If you start to feel overwhelmed with the amount of decisions, the player will absolutely feel overwhelmed with the amount of decisions, because they're not the ones who are excited about putting their own ideas in the game. You are. So if you're finding it too much, the player will find it too much as well. So yeah, knowing when to cut things is super important for sure.
When you hit the playtesting phase, does some of those get called then, or does some get added back in? Like, have you seen that happen?
Oh yeah, I mean, there have been quite literally last second cuts where And the thing is like sometimes you can be so excited about an idea that you never stop to ask, okay, but why are we putting this idea in? Because if something's not there to serve the story, the narrative, whether it's to keep things moving or to explore something thematically, but the idea is just a cool idea, you might be so excited about it that it becomes a bit of a blind spot to you. And then you don't want to be in a situation where it's too late to cut because it's already out there. So finding that level of objectivity when you're so emotionally invested in what you're making is very difficult. But yeah, there have been times where you have this like moment of clarity where it's like it's cool, but it's a cool moment. It's not servicing the story, and so it kind of becomes dead weight a little bit, no matter how cool it is.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm sure that sucks, but it makes sense.
It does, but you can save it for your next game.
There you go. There you go. Okay, well, let's bring the two together if at all possible. We're going to try and forge these alien metals together. Environmental design, and then the ability to create meaningful experiences and player choices without dialogue, using the surroundings. Is there a space for that? Can you allow choice and tell a story and empower the player using just environment?
I want to say yes. I probably wouldn't know how personally, but someone perhaps more talented or creative or experienced than myself could probably figure out a way. I mean, truthfully, there, in a way, you don't always need like the text to present choices, because if you look at something like the Stanley Parable, which has the narrator,
Yeah.
but I guess your the choices you make are not necessarily presented to you. They're things that you choose to make a choice, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If a player decides I'm going to walk straight down this hallway, then that's how the player chooses. If the player decides, oh, they're walking down the hallway and they see a door to their right, they're creating the choice for them. It's almost emergent gameplay, if that makes sense, where they're giving themselves a branch that another player may not have. So I think, in a sense, it's doable, but also the Stanley Parable is such a ridiculously interesting and creative and weird and original game. It's kind of a once in a generation kind of thing. So it can be done. It's just very, very difficult, I would say.
Right. What do you think about like that question? And again, this is a thought experiment. There may not be a right answer, and maybe nobody knows, but what about that question in the space of walking sims and survival games and sandbox games like Minecraft, where the player is creating emergent narratives? They're telling a story about what they're doing, even though there's no story there. But environment, like what comes to mind for me is DayZ. I don't know if you ever played DayZ, but you spend a lot of time wandering around and interacting with the environment. There is no narrative, there's no story, there's no dialogue, but you see things. You come across a car with that's been blown apart and burnt, and then you go a little further along and there's a wheel, and you start piecing these things together, and there may not intentionally be a narrative there, but as a player I start to create a narrative in my head that this car was hit by bandits and somebody tried to escape and they made it this far, and that's why I found loot there. Like, is there a space for creating that kind of narrative in choices about, okay, I go through this door, or I go through this door, or I go here and pick this up, without any dialogue, without any actual story? Like, what do you think of that space? And again, thought experiment, man. Like,
It's an interesting question. I mean, because like for me, and as pretentious as that might sound, I tell a story because I feel like there's something I want to say or make someone think about through the story. So I don't personally know how I would handle the idea of like trying to do the environmental design on a game that doesn't have a narrative, where if I'm placing something, it's not a piece of a bigger puzzle, it's just a bit of, set dressing or whatever you might want to call it. So, I mean, if players like can do that, more power to them. If they can get more out of a game than is maybe intended, that's awesome.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't really work that way. But maybe hopefully one day I can experience a game like that.
Very cool. I'm just curious. I like to pick different people's brains, so you get all kinds of different points of view on these kind of things, and I freaking love it. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's bring the core topic to a close. I guess I do like to try and find a bit of advice for junior writers, people coming into the industry or people trying to work their way up. What is something you've learned about on this topic that you think they should know about it?
I mean, the piece of advice I usually give, and for some people it fills them with hope, and some people it fills them with dread. So take that for what you will. But I always like try to remind people what we do is so, so, so subjective, where, writers, almost regardless of what industry they're in, you're going to get so many rejection letters. And the thing is, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not good at what you do. It just means you haven't found the person who gets what you do as a writer.
Right.
And in a sense, you are just kind of looking for that one producer or project manager or an investor or publisher who gets it, who understands your style and your way of approaching storytelling. So, those 50 rejection letters that pile up, that's not necessarily a reason to get down. It just means you haven't found the person who gets it. And if you're dedicated to your craft and you're really passionate about it, you'll get there. You just gotta, hold on a little longer, I guess. And you would be shocked at how many people hear that advice and just get really frustrated by it. Because I guess a lot of people don't like the idea of luck playing a part in their careers, but it is kind of luck that you have to wait for your script or your novel to get into the hands of the right people, unfortunately. Or fortunately, depending on how you view it.
Yep. I've heard that quite a few times too. It's about luck, but in order to get to roll the dice, you have to put in work. And when your luck comes up and your opportunity comes up, you have to be working in order to take advantage of it. So it is all about the work, but it is also about luck.
For sure. There's 100 things you can do to increase your odds, but your odds will never be 100%, but they'll also never be 0%. So,
There you go. Right on. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the core topic. I do have a question, though, that's a little out there, a philosophical question I ask everybody. So if you've listened to the show, you've heard it before, I'm sure. The question is, in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of story and game, obviously, but all kinds of things like music and film and all of these wonderful endeavors where people just come together. There's a shared language, there's a fellowship, we can get along, there's something binding us together. If you agree with my little theory, not everybody does, but if you do, what's the magical thread that holds that space together?
I mean, from my perspective, like having talked to people both inside and outside the industry about storytelling, I feel like, there's the old cliche, everyone has a story, but I think to an extent, a lot of people want to be storytellers as well. And while sitting in front of a blank page, trying to write a novel or a script can be super intimidating, I think stuff like games can give someone the opportunity to become a storyteller in a, low stakes kind of environment. Playing D&D, you can tell a little story with the help of the party and the dungeon master, and you can go on your arc and go on your quests, and you never feel like your life is on the line the way you might if you're trying to be a professional writer, for example. Because for me, like D&D is it's almost like the 21st century version of people sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories almost. People just enjoy storytelling, and if the stakes are low and the atmosphere is comfortable, it gives people that opportunity to just tell a little story. And, who doesn't enjoy doing that sometimes?
Brilliant. Love it. Very good. Okay, my friend, I'm going to start heading us out to the door, but before we go, I like to open up a little space for signal boosting. Is there anything you've worked on you want to promote, or where can people find you, or what are you working on these days that we should keep an eye on?
Sure. My studio's debut game is called Questing. The demo dropped 10-ish days ago, give or take. It's up on Steam if anyone wants to give it a try. It's a love letter to, classic 16-bit action adventure games like Link to the Past, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 3, but it's also satirical and silly and funny and weird. And we're very proud of it. And yeah, anyone who wants to give it a go, it's on Steam, and we appreciate any and all feedback as well. And we're on Blue Sky, Instagram, which I don't know how to use, TikTok, which I know how to use even less. But, we're out there if you want to find us, Jaggy Snake Games.
Wonderful. I will throw all the links in the description, in the show notes, and so people can find you easier that way. But let's all go check it out. Questing. Very cool. Very cool. Well, that's it. I'm going to have to push you out the door. It's time to get going. But I do love to give the guests the final word. Do you have any parting words of wisdom as you head out the door? And this could be career. This could be just life in general. This could be a recipe. Whatever you want to hit me with.
I mean, it's probably cliched at this point, but support indie devs. They do amazing work, and they're super passionate, and they're not jaded. I think like certain larger studios are. So give them some love whenever you can.
And that wraps up another episode of The Corner of Story and Game. Thank you again to Ian for sitting down and sharing your time, your experience, your wisdom. It has been an honor having you on the show. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review, comment, like, subscribe, and hey, come join us over on Discord. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.